Hi, Nick.
Hey, Skye.
Hey, I really thanks a bunch for engaging this conversation. I have to tell you, just on the front end of this, that your consistent work on Yemen over the years has really influenced my own. So, in particular, the trip that you took in the fall of 2018, where you wrote a number of columns, one of them even covering Sadaka Hospital, where we filmed, really impacted me as a human being and as a filmmaker, and influenced my choice to sort of film in that facility. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for that, because I think we all influence each other's focus and work, and you certainly have in this case.
Well, you you repaid any debt by producing a really important and fantastic film that I hope gets traction at a really important time for Yemen. I think there is some real chance now that we can end the war that causes this kind of problem, and that's going to come if there is sustained attention in the U.S. and around the world. It deserves it as well, but I think but that process also starts conversations, gets people moving.
Yeah, yeah. So you've had a chance to see the film now, obviously. I'm curious, having worked in that same facility as a journalist in Sadaka Hospital with Aida, who we just saw. Um, how does that uh, how does that feel for you to sort of see her both in the film through a different lens than you experienced her, right? And also now, 2 years later, after you worked with her, seeing her sort of, I think, communicate the same message in some ways, right? Is that this is still ongoing, her work still continues because the geopolitics of the conflict haven't been resolved. So I'm just curious about your reaction to all of that.
I mean, Skye, that's what's so painful, that those scenes could have been done, when I was there. They could have been done a year or two earlier. They could be done, next month. And it was wrenching for me to be in that hospital for, just a couple of days. You were there longer, and, it was wrenching for you. And poor Dr. Aida, I mean, she's there day in, day out. And watching kids die and starve to death is just a wrenching position for any human being, especially when it's preventable like that. So, boy, what a soul she is! What a
Yeah,
courageous,
yeah.
incredible woman she is. And I'm really glad you paid tribute to her fortitude.
Yeah, and I think fortitude is such a great word to describe the strength that she needs and Makia needs to sort of do the work they do, right? Which you witnessed firsthand. You know, one of the things that I thought about when I was there filming was, is this work that she's doing Sisyphean in nature, right? Is it rolling that rock up the hill over and over again, or is there, you know, is is the work that she's doing somehow intervening in a way that will enact change over time? And I think that's I guess a dual question I'd like to pose. You know, as a photojournalist, you continue to intervene in this conflict in your with your own tool set, right? Over and over again for years. And I understand that you had traveled to Yemen long before the war began. We've tried with this film, of course, to use it as a vehicle, right? A vehicle to raise awareness, and also to try to push, at least the Biden administration to act more forcefully with the geopolitical stance. Um, you know, what do you feel like the most effective approach could be for the Fourth Estate right now, in particular, to intervene in the conflict and the U.S. involvement in the conflict?
Um, it's simply a matter of providing coverage. And Yemen just has not been covered in the U.S. media, with some exceptions. The New York Times has done some, but TV. Think about when the last time
Yeah.
CNN or MSNBC or Fox News covered Yemen. And that is partly because the Saudis and the Emiratis have placed obstacles and made it very difficult to report from Yemen. But, if Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt were fighting in Yemen, the press would figure out ways of getting there. And the fact that the press doesn't try as hard to cover the world's worst humanitarian crisis, I think, is a failure on our part in the media. And one of the things I've learned in my career is that when problems are invisible, when they don't get attention, they don't get resolved. And, what we in the media can do is shine a relentless spotlight on these problems. And that's what you've done here. And that, it doesn't solve the problem, but it creates political pressure on the Saudis, on the Emiratis, on the US to put pressure on them, hopefully on the Houthis as well, because at the end of the day, what Dr. Aida is doing is saving lives, but the real way to save lives is to stop the war. And, that's the intervention that we need more than emergency feeding packets. And yet that is what, after 6 years, what we don't have.
Yeah, you remind me of David Miliband's quote that he did a couple of years ago about, NGOs can save the dying, but politics have to stop the killing. I think it's so true.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Skye, when I was watching it, I was wondering about the logistics of you covering it, because I found it such a difficult place to get there, partly because of the visa issue, and then it was also, frankly, a scary place. I thought Aden in particular was just kind of, I kept thinking, as all these people were walking around with guns, that if you have any sense, you're just going to kidnap me and hold me for ransom. And I was hoping that none of them had the same idea.
Yeah. Logistics were so difficult for us as well. I mean, I read in one of your columns, maybe it was one of the 2018 ones, that it took you 2 years to get your visas, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So now I feel really good because it only took us 8.5 months. Maybe we got really lucky. And did you get one visa or did you travel solo?
I just had the one visa.
Yeah. And we had asked for 2. And then after 8.5 months, they sent me 1. And I said to them, well, actually, I can't, even though we'd requested 2, I can't really do this film with all this equipment all by myself, right?
Yeah.
So they thankfully were giving us another one. But, to your point about Aden, I concur completely. Like, for us, at least, just from a security standpoint, that was absolutely the area when we were operating in and out of Sadaka on a regular basis, where security felt like at any moment it could completely collapse, right?
Right.
And someone could grab you off the street and you might just disappear, right?
Right.
And that's a psychological pressure, right? That's sort of consistent. Did you feel differently when you then traveled to the north, to the Houthi-held area?
Yeah, in the Houthi areas, and for those who don't know the geography, so
maybe we should unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, so the traditional capital of Yemen has been Sana'a in the north, and that is controlled by the Houthis, who are called the rebels, even though they're controlling much of the country. And then then Aden in the south is nominally controlled by this exile government that the outside world mostly recognizes, but in fact that government really doesn't control anything at all, and that's why it's just it's kind of a no man's land. And so when I was in the north in Sana'a, I felt much more secure because the Houthis, they're incredibly repressive. They can be quite brutal, but they do have control. And I didn't feel like I was going to run into a checkpoint and just be grabbed by somebody and sold to Al Qaeda. And whereas I thought that was a risk in the south. And in the north, there is some risk that, a US manufactured bomb will be dropped on me, by the Saudis. And it would be, it'd certainly be unpleasant to be killed by a bomb that my own tax dollars had paid for. But, I figured that was a pretty unlikely event. And that at the end of the day, it was strongly in the Houthis' interest to make sure that I got out alive, and that they would not probably do anything untoward to me. So I felt pretty relaxed going around Sana'a in the north, or at least comparatively relaxed. While I was pretty jumpy traveling around the south.
Yeah, we had the same experience for sure. So one of the things that I think really fascinates me is this, the famine, and I call it a famine despite the metrics not consistently matching the UN mandate for it, because I don't feel like they have enough data to make that determination, frankly. But I saw pockets of famine for sure throughout our time there. But this famine, as you know, is human caused, right? Which is just so fundamentally gut-wrenching if you see in person what that means in practical terms. And I think back sometimes to 1994 Rwanda, right, where the genocide began, and the world sort of paused or hesitated and didn't intervene in a significant way in any time to really avert, a genocide. And it was, I think to some extent it was because there was uncertainty about what was happening, what was unfolding. For me, you've reported so consistently, Lindsay Addario has reported consistently, Giles Clark, many others have gotten in and shown, without a question, that there is a human caused famine ongoing in the country for years now, and that our own government is complicit in that. And yet we haven't had the political will to stop that. And, my take is that we're going to, history is not going to shine a pretty light on that 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I'm curious how you see the fact that so many people have reported on this so well for a long period of time, and yet the geopolitics haven't yet resolved themselves to end such a horrible thing, the fact that there's a famine going on that we can prevent.
It's wrenching, and it's a political failure, but at some level it's also, I think, a media failure, because we've both seen that when there is enough media coverage about something, that does create the political will to address it. So, again, just to give a little background for those not steeped in the politics of Yemen. So look, Yemen has always been a poor country, and there's always been malnutrition in Yemen. But what really dramatically worsened things was that the current crown prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, back when he was defense minister, a newly appointed defense minister in 2015, I think he wanted to flex his muscles, to show he was a serious player, to show his expertise in the military, and he launched an attack on the Houthis. And the Houthis had indeed behaved irresponsibly in Yemen. So he launched an attack on them, and he thought this would be something that would be over in a few weeks, maybe a couple of months. The U.S. Initially, this is under President Obama, assented, because at that point they needed Saudi support, or they wanted Saudi support to work out their Iran deal. And then, instead of it being over in a couple of months and the Houthis being pushed out, in fact, it just dragged on, and thousands have been killed by bombs, by US-made bombs. But even more than that, the quarantine has meant that food isn't enough, not enough food is going in, not enough petrol and other supplies are going in, that fishermen aren't allowed to go out to sea to catch fish. And so kids starve to death. And as you say, this is a human caused starvation. And so if that quarantine were lifted and people were allowed to travel freely, then there would still be malnutrition. There would still be problems. There'd still be a poor place, but it would be far, far better off than it is now. And meanwhile, that military incursion, instead of showing the wisdom of MBS, it simply showed Saudi weakness. It empowered Al Qaeda in the area. There's a Al Qaeda affiliate there. It has led to the fragmentation of Yemen into all kinds of little local factions. It's been disastrous for security. It's been disastrous for everybody, but mostly disastrous for Yemeni children. 80% of the country now relies on food aid.
Yeah, which is just a horrific fact. So, we're kind of doing the very thing that I didn't do in the film, right? Now that you've seen it, is that the intent with the film really was to really just show the human impact of the conflict, because as a storyteller, I felt that's one way that film could sort of differentiate itself a little bit, was to speak through images, to speak to the heart directly, in the hopes that it would spark the intellect and people would be curious to want to know more. So now that you've seen the film, which is a completely different medium than you work in, can you just share with me sort of your reaction to sort of seeing the same story that you experienced yourself, but in a different medium, right? Because that must have been different for you. It's literally a different lens, right? To experience the same hospital.
Yeah, it is. And just the raw emotional power of, families seeing their kids struggling for life, and then in some cases dying, that just gets you. It wrenches you. And of course, starvation, indeed, when it kills, it mostly kills kids. Kids are more vulnerable to starvation than older people. I found it very, very painful to be there and to see that. And then watching the film, it brought back that flood of emotions, and also just this frustration that we haven't acted more aggressively to stop it. And this is a bipartisan failure. This was Democrats under Obama and Republicans under Trump, who both dropped the ball on this, and it's Europeans as well. It's not, it's diplomacy is hard. I recognize it's easy for us to say, so it's hard, but I don't think that American officials or European officials have pushed as hard as they could. And I think they've pulled back partly originally because of the Iran deal. And now again, perhaps because the Biden administration wants to rejoin the Iran deal. So I think, politics are again getting in the way of saving lives.
Yeah. One of the things that I was concerned about, that I tried to seek out in Hunger Ward in the film, I was just concerned that you never know what you're going to discover in the course of filming, right? You kind of have to just respond to what happens to some extent, because this wasn't a film that we in any way set up, right? We simply tried to be as observational as possible, and then pivoted into events as they occurred. But even within sort of that broader context, I was always looking for hope. I was always looking for moments where I felt like hope could mediate this really difficult context and environment and set of challenges that both Makia and Aida was working in. So it's why it's why, in the film, there's the shot of Makia, the 10-year-old girl, right, giving the cupful of water to the younger child, because I found that moment so beautiful, and I felt like it was really important to try to showcase those when they happen, because they do if we look for them. And that was sort of, I looked for small moments like that throughout. As a journalist, having covered this for so long, what gives you hope in this conflict, or in the current geopolitical dynamics, or do you see any?
So I guess I'd answer that in two ways. Two things give me hope, Skye. One is, that we tend to cover the horrible things, but side by side with the worst of humanity, you tend to find the best. And so in Yemen, you've got warlords who are raping and slaughtering and torturing. You've also got people like Dr. Aida, who are risking their lives and staying there and saving lives day in, day out. And so many aid workers who are going out and vaccinating kids, providing emergency feeding. It's in the US, we're not tested in the same way. Yemenis are tested. Some behave disastrously. Some behave with enormous courage and strength and decency and almost saintly qualities.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing that gives me hope is some of the background numbers. In 1960, 20 million kids a year died before the age of 5. By 1990, it was down to 10 million. Now we're down to about 5 million. And so the kind of scenes that you captured in that hospital, they are fewer than they would have been in the past. And that horror of a parent losing a child is indeed becoming more rare. Historically, almost half of kids died as children. Now it's down to 4%. So that should, I think, be not a reason for complacency, but rather a spur to address it and do what we can in places like Yemen. Now, I'm curious what the reaction to that has been here in the U.S. Have you, do you get people who just say, "Oh, Yemen, long way away. I don't really care about what's happening there. We got to solve our own problems first"? Or do you indeed, see that people feel concern, feel compassion, feel empathy, and feel that they do need to act?
Well, it's an excellent question, and I think if you'd asked me 5 months ago, I would have had a different answer. But it's been pretty consistent. Basically, it's a brick wall until people watch the film, frankly, and then it's different, and then it's sort of the opposite of that. So I think you're right. There's a barrier there because of lack of knowledge, lack of understanding, because it is a country so far away, despite the fact that we're complicit in it with our tax dollars. People don't know the complex geopolitical dynamics of it, because they are complex, right? And they are long-standing. People don't know that the Raytheon factory in Arizona, right, is killing children in Sana, right? Which we include that scene in the film, of course. But then what's been interesting is that once people watch the film, it flips 180. And then there's been a pretty consistent and abiding engagement with not only the film and the movement we're a part of to try to urge sort of a shift in the U.S. government stance, but people engage personally. So we've partnered with a bunch of civil society groups here in the U.S. and other countries that are pushing really hard. The Friends Committee for National Legislation, the Yemeni Alliance Committee, the Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation are all working on very different levels to apply pressure. And we're hopeful that pressure will continue to enact change, at least in governmental policy. So there's that brick wall, and then we punch through it once sort of they experience, I think, the empathy of being in these clinics.
And I think you're right that it's images that move people. I find that's one reason why I always care as much about the images that run with my Yemen articles as with the text, because I know that it's those, those photos or that video, whatever, that is really going to move people. But I also periodically get pushback from people who say, that's poverty porn, things like this. And I'm curious about how you deal with that issue. My response has been that, look, the doctors and the parents are eager to have this footage shown because they don't want other children dying. And they know that these stories and these images will save lives and will move people in a way that something obscured or fuzzy will not. And but it's so I mean I find reservations about this in the US sometimes in a way that I did not. About your sense of that.
Yeah, no, I hear that a lot, and it was certainly, it's something that I'm very intentional about, because I am working in images primarily, right? And so it's something that that I think a lot about, and I have a lot of conversations about, and that we're very careful about both during the filming process, but then also during post-production. And so the foundation for me, and the starting point, frankly, is really just that foundation of trust that you have to build, right? You have to, I mean, that's why we started communicating with Aida, Dr. Al-Sadiq, and with Makia so long before we did the filming, to sort of start that conversation early and get all their questions answered, and to make sure that they really wanted us there in the first place. And then within the clinics themselves, that's just a continuation of the same conversation, both with the healthcare workers, and with the families themselves. And I was surprised at the sheer number of families that we collaborated with who expressed that same sentiment that you did. That it's counterintuitive, I think, for an American to think that they would want any camera in a room when a child passes away. And as you saw in the film, that happened to us multiple times during the course of filming this, sadly. And it's the last thing we wanted to cover. It's the last thing we wanted to see or capture, frankly, but the families wanted us there. And when we talked to them after this really incredibly intimate family event unfolded and a child passed, in every instance, the family said, please, can you find a way to include this? You were here, you saw it, you have it in your camera, get it out to everyone, because we want people to know. We want people to know that my child died and didn't have to because we couldn't get enough food for them. So it's a very real sentiment that I think lives to this day, and it's horrific that that's the perspective, I think, that we need to live in. But until this changes, that's the reality.
Yeah, and I think that they feel, and they may be right, that so many of these lost lives are unnecessary and so frustrating, but that if that loss can be in a film that people watch around the US and around the world, then that may give some meaning to this young lost child, and create some benefit that helps other children and saves their lives. And I hope it does. I hope that officials watch and feel uncomfortable as they as they make very difficult trade-offs.
I think,
I think we're already seeing that to some degree.
In terms of the Biden administration's pivot.
Yeah. So actually, in a couple of ways. I mean, I think you're seeing that in terms. I think we were already seeing that in terms of the Emiratis and the Saudis. So the Emiratis already, they they said we're out of here, and there is indeed a wide belief that they still have, some people in Yemen, but in general, I think they felt that their reputation was being tarnished by the war in Yemen, and wasn't really bringing them much. And so they largely pulled out earlier. The Saudis, and both the Saudis and the Emiratis are paradoxically providing a huge amount of assistance, hunger assistance and aid to Yemen. And, they always make this point to me and say they should get more credit for all the lives they're saving. And, my counter argument is, yes, you are genuinely saving a lot of lives, but that's only because you are putting those lives at risk earlier, and you don't really get credit for saving lives that you endangered. But they have genuinely put in, I think they're really worried about a huge full-blown famine this spring, and they have been pouring money into Yemen for that reason. And then, as you say, the Biden administration has taken action to, they say, stop the use of offensive weapons by Saudi Arabia in Yemen. I think they put more pressure on Saudi Arabia. I don't think that has gone far enough. At the end of the day, we have leverage over Saudi Arabia. They don't have leverage over us. I think we should have made MBS pay for his murder of Jamal Khashoggi, rather than effectively let him walk. And again, I think this is partly the same miscalculation of 2015, that we need the Saudis to make the Iran deal work, and in 2021, it's some calculation that we need the Saudis to figure out how to get back in the Iran deal. And I think it was wrong in 2015, and I think it's fundamentally a miscalculation again today.
Let's talk just a little bit in the little bit of time we have left here about the blockade, because you've probably been following the recent news on that. But just in short, for listeners here, one of the most damaging aspects of the current conflict is a blockade of the country, both at the port city of Hodeidah in the west, and also over the airport in Sana'a, where I couldn't fly into. I actually had to fly into the south and then travel by road north, because they had already shut down journalists and filmmakers getting in on the UN flights by then. Probably because of you, Nick, because of all your stories. And so we flew into Aden and then went north. And that's that blockade, as you know, is causing an immense amount of suffering. And when we were in a hotel in Sana'a in the north, there were so many chronic care medical patients there that were holed up in that hotel, just hoping and praying that the Saudis were going to allow a medical flight out, because they kept promising it, right? And that's a big push right now, sort of politically, for the U.S. to exert pressure to open the airport in Sana'a, as well as to allow the free flow of humanitarian aid as well as diesel through the Hodeidah port. What are your thoughts on whether that they're going to lift that blockade, or whether the Biden administration is going to sort of unilaterally say to the Saudis, this needs to happen because of the current humanitarian cost? Do you think there's any chance of that?
So the Saudis have certainly become more, I think the Saudis really are eager for a peace deal that would open up the port of Hodeidah, that would open up the airport in Sana'a, that would basically end the quarantine, or allow fishermen to go to sea. So I think the Saudis really would like to work out such a deal. But right now, the Houthis are being obstreperous and are, as I understand it, part of an obstacle to that deal making. I think that there is a deal to be done. Earlier, the Saudis were insisting that the Houthis would have to leave Sana'a and go up north again. That was just unrealistic. I think that now there is enough pressure on the Saudis that a deal can be done. What I worry about, though, Skye, is that Yemen has been so destroyed by 6 years of war that I'm just not sure that any government can really fully control all parts of the country. And, that at least parts of it may end up being a little like Somalia, that it may be very hard to put Humpty Dumpty together again, and for aid workers to reach remote areas. So it, I guess I'm guardedly optimistic that a deal can be done that will end the war, but can peaceful development and aid assistance be rendered around the country? I think that is going to be a heavy lift.
Yeah, yeah. I'll buy you a crystal ball for Christmas and send you a crystal ball. So to I think I want to close this with just a note of hope, maybe. Back to that theme a little bit. So, what can Americans do, right? What can we do as taxpayers, to intervene, to assist this process of ending what we saw in hunger war, this human caused famine? What would you recommend for viewers? And then we have a couple action items that I'd like to toss out as well.
So I think that the two major points of vulnerability right now are the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I think that letters to MBS or to the Saudi ambassador in Washington, calling on them to lift the blockade, I think they can amplify that pressure on Saudi Arabia. And I think pressure on President Biden and the State Department, through one's member of Congress, for example, can make the Biden administration more willing to use its pressure and its leverage on Saudi Arabia to get that kind of deal. And, it's true at the end of the day that we also need the Houthis to participate. But if it's clear that the Saudis are willing to go there, then that creates more pressure on the Houthis. So I think that there is a deal to be done that can save a lot of lives here, Skye. And my dog here, I'm on the family farm, so my dog is signaling canine agreement as well.
Okay. So I do just want to mention briefly that today the Friends Committee for National Legislation sent a letter to the Biden administration, actually signed by Mark Ruffalo, a lot of celebrities and different civil society groups, urging further action to specifically lift the blockade. So, I think there's hope that there will be some traction there down the road. So, Nick, I just, the deepest gratitude to you for taking time out of your busy schedule to watch the film, to engage with us here and talk about a topic you know so much about. And I want to wish you the greatest of luck in your continued coverage of Yemen in the years to come, because I have a feeling that you're not going to let go of this one.
No, I won't. And thank you, Skye, for going there, for taking the risks of covering that story. And thanks to everybody who's watching for engaging in a story that is a long way away, that may seem remote, but that involves a lot of lives that are at stake.
And people can go to hungerward.org, where we have a repository of both action items where people can engage with the senators and representatives and the Biden administration, as well as donate directly to the 2 clinics showcasing the film. So thank you so much for everyone attending. And Nick, again, many thanks.